I saw all this, and it was so outside the pattern of my existence.
Yeah.
At night, the fires looked like lava flows on the distant hills of the park. I mean, it was beautiful and scary at the same time, and I knew that it was a different place that I was coming to.
Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 92. If you'd like more information about the podcast, it's all at the website desertladydiaries.com, and I invite you to engage with the guests, with other listeners, or me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries, or on Twitter at Desert Lady Diary.
Miriam Segar grew up in Portland, Oregon, an only child to a Japanese mother and Lithuanian Jewish father. Her college years were spent in Eugene, Oregon, where the Grateful Dead played every summer and the influence of Ken Kesey was everywhere. She developed an interest in film while attending art school, which led to more than 30 years as an art director for TV commercials. In the quiet of the desert now for 15 years, Miriam finds herself conflicted being a human amongst humans, doing her best to take what feels like 2 steps forward and 2 steps back in doing her part to make the world a better place. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
As always, the first question is, what was your first experience with desert?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because it caused me to think about a memory that I hadn't had for a long time, and I realized that it did feed into my moving to Joshua Tree. In 1979, I went to the high desert of Oregon to see an eclipse. And that area was in the path of totality. So we all went out there. And it's the Columbia River Gorge, so it's a big, flat desert area. It was just absolutely amazing. I'd never seen such open space. And we could see the shadow of the moon coming from miles away, just racing towards us.
Oh my gosh.
So I had this experience where I realized that I lived in outer space. I had never really thought like that before.
Oh, interesting.
And being in the desert and having all of that empty area allowed me to have that experience.
So how does it feel here on a full moon night for you?
Very similar, actually. And I just wonder what being deprived of the stars does to people. How much that changes your mindset.
That's an amazing thought. I sometimes, on a moon when we know it's going to be big and beautiful, I will drive into the park to watch it come up.
Oh, and it's even darker there.
Darker there, and it feels like you are on the moonscape. Even with all the trees, it just has that sense of vastness and nothing and quiet. It's amazing.
I think we forget that. We forget that outer space seems like an exotic thing that's out there, but we're in it.
We're in it. Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. So then, that was your first experience with desert. What brought you to Joshua Tree? How did that story start?
Well, specifically, because I had done the film work in Portland, and at that time, Portland was a fairly rural, it was kind of a little bit cosmopolitan and a little bit rural. I had also moved to New York and done the work there, worked some for MTV, worked in LA. I had so many friends in Portland, I had so many friends in New York, but I just never really connected to the community in LA. Really loved working there, though, because all of the finest craftspeople in the industry do work there. So it is a rush. It's like a 24/7 lock and load high to be in production in LA. But I had zero community there. So I wanted to find a place that was a little bit like Portland, a little bit like New York, a little bit just a mashup of all the best things. Came to Joshua Tree, bought a place, didn't look back.
Wow. Did you know anybody when you moved here?
I didn't really know anyone. It kind of was precipitated by a relationship that I was in, and we decided that I'm very independent, so rather than moving together, we thought we would get a house together in the desert. In fact, I didn't really even know Joshua Tree. I had wanted to come to Joshua Tree when I first moved to LA, and somebody told me, just drive down the 10, you'll run into it. Just drive east. So I went all the way to the General Patton Museum.
Oh my goodness.
And I was looking around, I was thinking, where are the artists? we're the Bohemians.
Right.
And I was in the wrong part of the world. But something always did want me to come out here. So I found a house. And then my partner at that time, who was going to be my partner on the house as well, decided not to do it, which was really sort of a power thing. And I bought the house and never looked back.
Good for you.
So,
wow. So once you were here, what year was that?
that was 2006.
2006.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So my move to Joshua Tree was also a break in a toxic period in my life. And I thought I've moved to a scene in The Hills Have Eyes, and I've become a complete misanthrope. What have I done? And I've never met so many wonderful people in my life in one place.
How did you start meeting people when you moved here? How long did it take before you said, okay, I just need to go out and start, looking
Well,
around?
interestingly enough, I had gone on the art tours, which I recommend to anyone who is new out here. Because what the art tours and the garden tours and those things do is it gets you down all these little dirt roads that you might not have otherwise known had existed.
Right.
And you see from this area, there's an incredible view of San Jacinto. From this area, there's an incredible view of the dry lake bed. Just as you move into these different little hidden pockets and private residences, you see the geography and the topography of the area in ways that you hadn't imagined, in new ways. Plus, you meet people. And another thing that I love about those tours is that you meet so many people who are not worried that they're ever going to have nationwide exposure. They're not worried that they're not going to have an article in Art Forum. They're out there, they're doing it every day.
Right.
They're doing it in their garage, in their whatever, completely unselfconsciously, and they're opening up their house. So it's less about the work and more about the activity of people doing what they love on an ongoing basis.
Which is really beautiful.
Yeah, so that's a really great way to meet people in the community and keep it real and meet a lot of locals and understand what the place is all about.
Well, I'm glad you said it that way because I often say to people, unless I have a destination, I don't typically just tool around and say, oh, let me go out to North Joshua Tree and roll around those roads because I don't know sometimes what is a road, what's somebody's private property. I don't want to put myself in jeopardy because you can put yourself in jeopardy depending on whose road you're on. So I'm glad you said it that way because it is a great way to travel to those areas of town that you might not necessarily go to, but you've got an open invitation.
That's right,
on those
and
weekends.
you're welcome versus a lot of us live out here because we like having the space around us
Right.
and the privacy. So
Exactly. Once you were here, what did you decide to do with your days?
Well, when I first started coming out in 2006, I'd leave set as soon as they called wrap on Friday. And I would drive out here for as long as I could, which usually meant going back Monday morning at 3 or 4 in the morning. But people used to ask me, they used to say, what do you do out there? Do you take a lot of naps? Do you read a lot of books? It's amazing how quickly that's changed.
Right.
Because at the end of my working days about 4 years ago, when I finally stepped out of that line of work, people were saying, you got to help me find a house. It's not fair. You have great houses out there and you need to hook me up. And I thought, these were the people who 10 years earlier thought that it was completely boring to be in the desert.
Right.
So,
Well, and I have people still who ask me, well, what do you do out there? I'm like, you have no idea how full my calendar is on a regular basis. And I mean, you can not go out. There is always that option. And I think sometimes when we see people out that we haven't seen out in a long time, and you say, oh, wow, I haven't seen you in a long time. They're like, yeah, I'm just kind of backing off. You don't even have to take the conversation further than that because you get it.
well, I love the supper clubs that people do here. I think everyone likes to have their own space here, but compensates by there's a Thanksgiving dinner we go to for, I don't know, the last 10 years it's been the same group of people.
Wow.
Maybe 40 people. And some of those people I only see that one day a year. But they are my special friends because of that. And on Sundays, we used to go to Pappy and Harriet's. That's where all the locals converged. That was back way before it was busy, and I do miss that, but I'm happy for Robin and Linda and all their success.
Sure.
The week that I closed on my house, it was the week of the Sawtooth fires. So I drove up here very excited with my pots and pans, and I had made sure that the people I bought the house from left the bed because I wanted to drive to the house and sleep there as soon as I had the keys. And I brought my dogs and my essentials, and as I came up the Morongo grade, suddenly you started seeing plumes of smoke, black plumes, and the sky was oxblood red, and there were fire trucks lined up at Denny's, and the horse trailers were queued up at Old Woman Springs Road to bring the horses out.
Right.
Because people were coming from all over the area with horse trailers, loading horses and taking them off out of the area to their ranches, and not even, there wasn't even the time for people to make the proper arrangements. And after the fires, there was a little bit of scrambling for people to get reunited with their animals. But I saw all this, and it was so outside the pattern of my existence.
Yeah.
At night, the fires looked like lava flows on the distant hills of the park. I mean, it was beautiful and scary at the same time.
Yeah.
And I knew that it was a different place that I was coming to.
No kidding.
So the first things I really did when I was out here, because I had a scraped lot, I started gardening, started planting, putting in cuttings, dumpster diving for... I actually pulled some yuccas from the dump.
Wow.
That people were throwing out, unfortunately. And I just did that, and I did that at night. And the Black Hawk helicopters and the sound of the bombs, and it was all so new.
Mm-hmm. What a way to start your journey.
But it was so amazing. But the reason I was talking about the art tours is I had been on the art tour. This is how I first started meeting people. I'd been on the art tour, and I had met Sherry Elf at Art Queen.
Yeah.
And she was telling
Sherry
me...
Elf.
Yeah, so
I'm wearing a
there
Sherry
you go.
Elf original today.
So she gave me a little flyer for a show she was doing at the Palms.
Oh my goodness.
So I didn't know anyone, and one night I was, what we all do when we first get a cabin out here, I was painting, chiseling, fixing, digging, and I thought, I just have to get cleaned up and go out somewhere. This is not a good pattern I'm falling into. So I got in my car, and I had never been to the Palms, and I'm driving, and as I'm driving out there, I'm thinking, I'm losing my mind. Where am I going? What is happening here? And I thought, I'm going to this place. I'm going to a bar by myself where I don't know anyone.
In the middle of nowhere.
And I'm traveling a really long distance to do this, and I'm probably just going to come home. Why am I even going? And of course I walked in, and you know how the community is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A new face. Everyone was so welcoming. And I made my friends that first night.
That's amazing.
I was listening to Alice's podcast, and she was talking about how she just walked around in downtown and listened for the sound of music and was suddenly part of the community the next day.
It's very welcoming that way.
Yeah.
You don't have to look too long and hard to find your people, if you will. And when I ran into you at the MAC meeting, which is another place that you can meet people, I suppose, that are passionate about keeping track of what's going on in their community and what's happening in the area, you were talking about the bighorn sheep and the difficulties that they're having right now and where people are putting water. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Oh, yeah. Well, so since I've come out here, I've just gotten involved in wildlife advocacy.
Well, I saw on your website, I mean, the list of things that you support is amazing. MDLT, Friends of Griffith Park, Humane Society, Project Coyote, National Parks Conservation, Mountain Lion Foundation, Center for Biological Diversity.
I think those people are doing such good work, and I think it's really hard. Even if you have the lightest footprint, it's still a negative impact on wildlife. And since I've been here, I've learned sort of a lot of ways of coexisting the best that I can. So at least I'm not a complete disincentive to the movement of wildlife. We worked on the bobcat trapping ban a few years ago.
Right.
That took a group of us 5 years, but that came from right here in Joshua Tree. So everybody in the community should be proud of how they supported that and how it turned into a statewide
Right.
thing.
Right.
But I recently started hearing about the bighorns, specifically in San Gorgonio. There was a herd of about 250 animals there. Over the past couple of years, the die-off has brought that population down to 60, and they found 20 carcasses there. And so I kind of got alarmed and contacted the biologist and have learned more and more about it. That is pneumonia, and that's due to exposure to domestic goats and sheep.
Oh.
And, a lot of people don't know about that.
Yeah.
They just don't know that their livestock can be carriers. The livestock are carriers, and there's no way to inoculate for that. So this has been a problem. I thought that this was sort of a recent problem as we're pushing out into wildlands interface. But I started reading, and this problem started when the Spaniards first brought livestock to this country.
Oh my goodness.
So bighorns were incredibly ubiquitous. And as early as the late 1800s, reintroductions began to happen with bighorns into areas that they had become extinct from because of disease. So the Mojave Desert is one of the last places that bighorns are still allowed to be hunted. In California, the peninsulars down below and the Sierras up north, those are already endangered, but our herds aren't. Now, hunting is an interesting thing, and this is when you peel back the layers of the onion as a conservationist. If it weren't for hunting, the research and recovery that's being done for bighorns would not be going on. The Mojave fringe-toed lizard is also endangered, but no one is helicopter transporting them into new suitable habitat. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and in fact, the Department of Fish and Wildlife is doing a study where they're implanting neonatal transmitters, which are basically in utero.
Whoa.
They implant the lambs before they're born with a transmitter so that if they have sudden death after they're born, they can go collect the carcass and research it, because that's the only way the biologists can learn anything to try and fight this disease problem. So it's a very complicated world we live in.
Yeah.
And in fact, out here, another thing that I learned is, because I have a large conservation parcel by Coyote Hole, the Marines buy conservation easements. Do you know about this? They buy flyover easements. They can't do their training exercises over areas that are populated. So they will buy a flyover easement over open land.
Is that temporary, or is that then permanent?
I don't have an easement with them, so I don't know how long those go for, but I did sort of discuss it with someone who was an intermediary for the base. But it is a way for people to hold large parcels of land open
Oh.
and have enough support to sort of, it's very hard just to hold open land,
Especially now these days
Yeah,
here. Yeah.
yeah. And so that military training becomes a strange bedfellow of conservation. So the world is a very complicated place. It's not black and white.
No, that's for
So-
sure. At the stage where they are with the bighorns, is there anything that anybody listening can do to help that effort?
The biggest thing is to understand that goats, sheep, cows grazing within a 9-mile buffer on any bighorn migratory paths or territories can cause the spread of the disease. The disease is pretty persistent now, just because we're all butted up against each other. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do with that particular herd. That herd ranges from Pioneer Town all the way down to the 10.
Wow.
And Morongo. Morongo is another boundary for that herd. So they're like our local herd.
Right.
And once a herd drops below 50, it's very likely that herd will become extinct. So that herd is in trouble.
You've also have a new project in
Yes.
downtown Joshua Tree.
That's right. We just finished renovating the old hospice thrift store. Those 2 little buildings down there, and
Yeah.
the businesses are starting to move in and open up, and it's been kind of a long haul.
Yeah.
But it's only been a year and a half. It's gone by quickly.
That
but
doesn't seem bad. I mean, when I talk to people that have built something, or in your case, you renovated, The biggest complaint seems to be like the county and all their hoops.
Well, my production background really helped me out.
Oh, good.
Because, it used to be that when a producer came to me and said, the director wants to shoot at this place, but it's not available, it didn't mean we weren't going to shoot there. It meant find a way.
Right.
For us to shoot there on that day where the director wants to shoot. And so I just treated doing the building like I was working on a job that was going to shoot next week. And I did a lot of driving down to the county in San Bernardino. I did a lot out here at the local office. And I think dealing with the county, it doesn't always make sense, but it is very helpful to just go there and work the room. Because there is that thing that happens between people when they're talking face to face.
Yeah.
And a lot was resolved that way.
That's great.
So I don't think it's that much more difficult anywhere else. It is very difficult here because we have a wastewater situation with the septic.
Right.
And we've got 85% of our groundwater recharges from septic tanks. It didn't used to be a problem when there was one cabin here and one little store there and things were spread out. But with the amount of development we have, it's really a problem. And that's why we couldn't put a restaurant in. I know everybody out there wanted a restaurant.
I see.
The amount of groundwater.
Well, the brewery
waste.
was trying to do Joshua Tree Brewing Company.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with that, but that's right up the street here on the left. And I know that was a big issue, was the wastewater, or the waste that would come off of making the product. Really, they had nowhere to put it.
Yeah, well, the one thing I'm really happy about the building, and this was sort of my rule going into it when I rented it, is that everyone who has a space there is a Joshua Tree local. So,
awesome.
In fact, the people in the middle space called me up about the space, and after we talked for a few minutes, they said, "We think we know you. We think you came to our house once with sample letters and maps about off-road vehicle routes planned in our neighborhood." And I said, "Yeah, that was me.
Yeah,
that had to be me.
right.
I don't remember that, but..." So I'm very pleased about that. And another reason that I wanted to do it was I've been going to these community plan meetings for years. And for anyone who's been to one of those, they're very frustrating. And they know we've been going around and around, and we don't want Dollar General, and we've hosted land use out here to show them the direction we want to go in, and they nod their heads like they understand. They say, "Oh, like a little mini Santa Fe or something."
No.
And we say, "Okay, well, that's a good, not exactly, but if that's how you want to frame it, we'll encourage that way of thinking." We want unique owner-operator businesses in the downtown. And I just got so sick of going to those things. I thought, this is a lot of square footage. Maybe if we do something with it that shows that model can succeed, more people will come in and do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the best way to go, really. I wonder if also that there are some ways that the county can relax some of their restrictions or rules, whatever you want to call them, for a mom and pop business who doesn't have the wallet that like a Dollar General has to meet all of those, whether it's purchasing all of the plumbing or setting up the proper septic and the wastewater plant. Little mom and pops don't have the money to put up a $500,000, what are they calling it?
A water
water processing
Yes,
plant,
and then
or
those
whatever.
things are also, there are a lot of issues with those.
Right.
I looked into putting one in the building because I was going to do that rather than going so crazy on the cosmetic stuff. But there are huge problems with those alternative wastewater treatment units, and not the least is which that they are very difficult to keep functioning. One thing that happens here is, at least properly for testing the water, we're very seasonal here. And those things for testing purposes kind of require very steady flow. So it's very easy if you've got a mechanized, automated bottle washing plant or something where you're running the same amount of water every day, the conditions are the same. But variation in that causes the water testing to be different. I think that's part of the problem that Walmart had. And when your water doesn't test consistently, it's a health issue.
Right. Well, that's interesting that you should say that, because I think about, what does it sound like? How big is it? And then I also think about, when you say it's seasonal, this 55 Airstream trailer auto camp business that they want to put down here very near the Dollar General. I mean, obviously, that's going to be a seasonal thing. So that's an interesting point.
Well, I think that here's how I feel about development. I feel that development is inevitable, and it's because of the elephant in the room that no one ever talks about is that there are just too many people. And that trend is not stopping.
No.
And as long as things are run by human beings, we're going to push further into wildlands interface. We're going to have more wildfire problems. We're going to have all these things. So development is going to continue, and it's not a function of people coming to Joshua Tree or Airbnb. It's just a function of more people needing places to go, needing to disperse. My thing is, why can't development be aesthetic and as conscientious as possible?
Sure.
You know, you can't get recycled toilet paper without having it come in plastic.
Right.
So there's no way to just avoid any of that.
You just have to kind of work in it the best that you can and keep it as low carbon footprint, if you will.
But I always loved the story about Steve Jobs going to Reed College, where he didn't graduate, but he just walked around and he noticed that all the door numbers were hand calligraphed. And that's where he got the idea for Adobe. And that's where he got the idea for the design of his computers. He was like, why can't it be beautiful? Why does it have to just be a thing?
Right.
And we presume
box.
that houses have to look a certain way. We presume that they have to be built in a certain way. And I think that there are ways to make ordinary things that we need more beautiful.
Well, and there are also ways to develop and use energy that we haven't even begun to harness. And
There are. You know, there is this talk now about solar waste, because solar panels are extremely toxic. They've got cadmium, they've got lead in them, they have all these things. And they're sent overseas to be recycled because of the toxicity and the stuff in them and all that. And they're very often sent to places where they're not being recycled properly.
Oh my goodness.
And so, you know, this is what I mean about being a human being. What do I do?
Right, I think I'm doing the right thing, and then 5 or 10 years later I find out that I'm really not.
We can just try our best and try and learn and try and speak up about what we see.
Right, and I feel like this community is pretty fortunate to have as many people as they do to speak up and show up to talk about these things. And
it is kind of an amazing little community.
Yeah.
I think that always surprises developers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that are trying to do something that's really not eco-friendly.
Well, and what's funny to me is that they'll just drop money on a big parcel of land without even considering where it is, what's going on there. Oh, just buy that and we'll slap something up. Wait a minute.
Well, I think one of the most difficult things to explain to my friends in the city who are conservation-minded is the damage of the solar farms. There's scraping and there's herbicides, and then there's these wildlife blocking giant fences with razor wire.
Right.
And there are transmission lines that run for hundreds of miles. You know, electricity degrades
that you
over
can
the
literally
course of that.
hear the electricity
And that
running
these
from.
projects are actually kind of pyramid schemes where people buy the land, get a certain kind of level of permitting, sell it to the next group that does a certain other tier of the thing. This was all opened up with the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Well, the Obama-era fast-tracking of green energy opened the door to exploitive practices.
Ouch.
So it's very hard to explain to people, put the panels on your roof, use the power right there on the site.
Right.
That is really the solution. So when one of the solar companies that wanted to scrape along the highway, they offered the downtown a fire truck to go away. It's like, we'll give you guys a fire truck.
Boy.
So I think that that's common. We're coming to the desert. There are a bunch of hillbilly rubes that live out there.
Right.
And so I'm always very proud of how the community
Response.
rises up and
Yep.
pushes back with people here know how to read an environmental impact report.
Right.
They know how to call on our federal protections. And I think that
It's amazing.
that
and
is
it's
amazing.
pretty impressive. Yeah, and I'm proud to be a part of that community. 30 minutes has gone by already.
Wow, okay.
So, I'm going to ask you to pick 4 numbers between 1 and 50, and those answers will be made available to the Patreon supporters of the podcast. If you are not currently a Patreon supporter but you would like to be, go to the website desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and check out the Patreon option. Your 4 numbers, please.
8, 12, 28, and 48.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to read those and find my magic question list.
I love 8.
Was there ever a time you thought you wouldn't need to support yourself if you were married? Top 3 favorite pizza toppings. What are a few things you're really grateful for? And is female progression in the workplace better or worse? So if you would like to hear Miriam's answers to these questions, go over to desertladydiaries.com and sign up to be a Patreon supporter. Thanks for coming in today.
Alrighty.
Got a shout out this week to Lori for signing up for the weekly newsletter. I appreciate you, Lori, and I'm glad that you are enjoying the podcast. Have you ever heard of experimental music? Well, we have several local folks who create this, and one of them goes by the moniker Fog Machine. I went to an experimental music show they produced sometime last year, and it was actually really cool. Some of the performers use synthesizers, and others mix the synth music with guitars or spoken word, and some of the music is played along with a video that's being shown on a screen. I say all of this because Fog Machine is actually wondering if there are any women who are doing this and would like to be a part of their upcoming performances. So if you or another female you know has been experimenting with experimental music, get in touch with Fog Machine at PHOGMASHEEEN at earthlink.net. Fog Machine with 3 E's at earthlink.net. And if you're interested in just hearing what experimental music is all about, go to the website fogmachine.com, and that's Fog Machine with only 2 E's, and check it out. I'll put this contact information at the end of the blog post and in the show notes as well if you need to reference that. Now here's my friend Jean-Paul to introduce you to Simultaneous Times.
Science fiction stories and interviews blasting straight out of the Mojave Desert and beyond. Space Cowboy Books presents Simultaneous Times Podcast. Free to stream on your favorite podcast player. Find out more at spacecowboybooks.com and be sure to visit our store in Joshua Tree, California.
See you back here next week. Thanks so much for listening.